Hi, I'm Mary Beth Quinn, a mixed media collage artist, and I'm standing in front of a wall full of some of the paintings from my new series, The Enchanting Wilds. And this whole process that it's taken to make all of these paintings is about 6 months. From the first inklings of, I want to do something new, but I don't feel at all like I know what that is. It can be a very uncomfortable feeling because you have a strong urge, but you don't really have any of the infrastructure or context yet. So that all began last fall, and for a solid 3 months, I explored what was to come next. Those were the uncomfortable months because I had to press on even though I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. And I'll show you a little bit about how I did that, what the elements were that helped me to find my way to something that really feels like me and feels like something that is not just relevant as far as my techniques or my process, but relevant as far as where I am in my life. A lot of things that when I think about them, instead of feeling more like I understand how this works in life, they feel a little bit more mysterious or elusive. So I really wanted that to come through in my work. That was something that I knew was very important to me at this time in my life, that I felt like these things that I think about on a daily basis, as far as living and being here on this planet is concerned, I wanted those things to come through my process and inform what I was choosing to do. So I'll tell you a little bit about how this happened. So to really tell you about how it all came about, I feel like I have to start at the end. And this was one of the last pieces. This is called Breakthrough. It's a 30 by 30 on canvas, and one of the last ones that I created. By the time I got to the last 3 pieces, I felt like I found it. So it's not that I don't like any of the other pieces in the series. I actually love them all, and I really love that they show my process evolving throughout the series while they're still being all cohesive with one another. But to really land on something like this, it was very, very illustrative to me of what I was going for. What I love about this is that it's clearly a landscape, but that there are so many abstract elements in here that they're clearly not meant to be representational of an actual place. It's more about emotion and using color and texture and line to really add in the emotion that I feel when I am in the landscape, because it is in nature that I feel the calmest, that I feel the most connected, that I feel restored. There's always also that element too of your being in a wild place. It is an uncivilized, unpredictable place, yet it is where we all come from, which there's something to think about. But I love how this one turned out. I love the marks, and I used a lot of collage paper in all of these pieces. This was a good example of where I will go from here, but I'll show you where this started and what methods I used to actually get myself started. When I felt this urge to go back to my landscapes after working with collage and botanicals for a really long time, I felt a very strong urge, but I knew that just going back to my old process of working with landscapes was never going to interest me anymore. And even though many of my paintings still have so many of those same characteristics, I approached them completely different. And I used some of the elements that I have always used, but in a different way and in a heightened way. And so really, it's all about my own experience of it, to really reinvigorate that experience and make it new and fresh to me so I could come at it with new ideas and new eyes. I had to sort of start from scratch. In my old process that I was familiar with, I probably would have started with a brush similar to this, And then I would have gone a little bit smaller as it got more detailed, and then eventually wound up doing some glazes with a big brush like this that I could really smooth things out. I would use also some collage that really had a lot of landscape type elements to it. But I knew I wanted to do something different. I told myself that I was going to start with tools that I was very unfamiliar with. These are made of just silicone. They're bendy, and I was going to use them instead of a paintbrush, which meant I would have to figure out how to do that. I would have to move differently, probably be a cruder mark, which I was hoping for. So in addition to the unfamiliar tools, I made myself use unfamiliar materials. I chose acrylic inks. I hadn't worked a lot with those. And I made myself use an extremely limited palette. So just 2 colors, which were often orange and blue, and then just some black and white paint. I was really drawn to the really dark landforms because one of my favorite times of day is at night when the sun has set, the sky is lit up, but the land gets really dark. That was what I chose these inks for, is because they're very, very saturated, and I could make that happen. So one of my favorite combinations that I started putting together was burnt umber and black inked. Another favorite combination was just orange and black. It gives you, as you can see, a very beautiful green. And I could also mix with that orange just a little bit of black and get really beautiful dark oranges, browns, and such. So at first I just did lots of studies. I did them on all different kinds of paper, and I gave myself a time limit. All of these elements wound up coming together to make the 1514 Experiment Challenge, which I invited a lot of other artists to join me on. And it's just a fabulous way to make yourself move to a new place because you don't have a lot of time, you can't be fussy, you can't be neat, and you just get things on the paper. So I made a lot of these studies, probably well over 100, all different sizes. I didn't care about the quality of paper I was using. This is decent paper. This is just much thinner paper than it needs to be for the materials I was using, and I liked having that limitation as well. So I just made study after study after study for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. Eventually, they began having characteristics that were more consistent with one another. This led me to making a book of my favorites so I could really take notes and look at, and some of these are works from a couple of years ago, maybe several years ago. I wanted to find what was truly me, what I was really going after. So I would make notes on all of these. Over time, I began to see the commonalities. Then I began seeing the studies and sketches that I actually felt like were on target. They were representative of my work. And those are many of the paper pieces that I have for sale with this series. All of these paper pieces are matted and they have a backing board on them. They can just be popped into a frame once you get them. They go as small as 5x5 painting, and they go up to a lot of 5x7s. These are 5x7s, 6x8s, and almost all of these were studies that I pulled out and thought, that's exactly what I'm going for. I love the looseness, I love the spontaneity, and so they made it into the final batch. I really love that one. This one is a 6x8. It's called The Wilds. There were a few of these smaller ones that I actually based some of my bigger paintings on. I didn't try to replicate them exactly, but I tried to get the feel that they had. All of these come with a certificate of authenticity for the artwork. This one is a 10x13. I have a number of 10x13s, and they're matted so they fit into a standard size frame. I have a few of these pieces that actually come with a frame, and that is simply because I had frames in stock that I could just pop them into. But this is a paper piece that was based on a small study as well, and so that will be available along with a few others that already have their frames. So at some point, I went from making those small studies to making larger ones, making that jump from paper to canvas because the texture is so different. It was yet another adjustment that I had to figure out. These two right here, they're both 12 by 12. Those were the first canvas pieces that I did, and I just sort of went up from there. I did at the same time some 16 by 16s, and it kept going from there. Scaling up is yet another hurdle that you have to figure out. When you make a little pencil mark on a small paper piece, it has a certain effect in ratio to the size of that paper piece. But you get to a big 30 by 30 canvas, and that little pencil mark is hardly even going to show at all. So you've got to figure out what materials are you going to use now that will get the same effect. And once I really got into the process, I began adding some elements that would help me scale up and really get the effects that I wanted. Some of my favorites were this tailor's chalk, which I can show you really quickly what some of these look like just on this scrap study. So you can just use this tailor's chalk like this, and when you add water to it, it gets very vivid and you can move it around. I also use some soft pastel, which is a wonderful effect. I'm still not really happy with what happens when you try to fix it. It loses a lot of its vibrancy with a lot of the pastel. So I had to sort of look for alternative things that I could use. I did wind up using these oil pastels as one of the very last things I would put on a painting. Those make really nice lines as well. This was a surprising addition. These little watercolor pens, they just have pigment in the pen. You can, use them like a pen, but when you put water on them, they get very watercolory effects, which I really used on a lot of my water places to enrich the color, and when it dries, it has a very watercolory look. My collage paper really changed as well. I love a lot of wording like this. I had some poetry books, so I had to find things with bigger letters to translate to the bigger size. I like to use a lot of asymmetric writing, and so I would use things like pieces of maps, and I would just pick up the dried paint on my palette. So it already going onto the painting had very spontaneous marks and wonderful little flourishes that you could add to certain parts of your painting. As you can see, so this landmass right here, when you get up close, you can see the maps and the collage paper that are there. And then I just put some paint over the top to incorporate it into the actual landscape. It's all very subtle. There, you can see it in the water. All of these dark marks right here that just look like shadows in the water were actually a piece of collage paper. And a big player in this series was my use of transparency. I love transparency, especially when I'm dealing with water and sky. It turns my inks and paints into transparent glazes. So as you can see, I was able to make this water look like it has things underneath the surface, things floating on top of the surface, and light reflections because of that glazing medium. And it's so much fun to work with. Well, that about covers it, and thank you for going along with me on this journey of making an entirely new series of work and trying to figure out what your process is going to be. Anybody that actually paints knows that that can be a really scary and intimidating venture, but I can say from this side of it that I'm so happy that I did. I'm so happy I stuck with it because it was such a moral victory, because I've painted for over 20 years and this is the first series that I've done. And it's also quite satisfying. You get to the other end of it and you realize that the discomfort and the insecurity that you feel is actually appropriate for how little information you have going in, but it's not the appropriate response to stop if you really want to find what's on the other side, because just pressing through and having it develop before your eyes is about one of the most satisfying experiences I've ever had. So I hope that you enjoy taking a look at this series. You can find information on how to see it down in the description, and if I can help you find a piece at all, just let me know. I'm happy to do so.